My parents spent 24 years calling me a fat embarrassment who would die alone and unloved, then tried to sabotage my 60-pound weight loss transformation because I became too confident and was suddenly stealing attention from their golden child daughter's $200,000 wedding. These are the same people who used to make me stand behind everyone else in family photos so I wouldn't ruin the shot. The same mother who told my high school boyfriend's parents I had eating issues to explain why I didn't look like my perfect sister. The same father who announced at my college graduation dinner that he was just glad Bonnie would never let herself go like that. Here's the part they pretend never happened. They demanded I lose weight for Bonnie's wedding, threatening to exclude me from the ceremony entirely if I didn't clean myself up for her special day. So I did. I lost 60 pounds, dropped 4 dress sizes, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. That's when the tone changed. Suddenly, my weight loss wasn't healthy, it was attention-seeking. My clothes weren't appropriate, they were trying to compete with the bride. The same family group chat that used to mock my body now coordinated messages about how I was acting out and making people uncomfortable. What they didn't realize was that while they were rewriting history, I was documenting it. I had years of messages, witnesses who'd watched the bullying firsthand, and proof of academic and personal achievements they'd quietly minimized to protect Bonnie's fragile image. The breaking point came at a family lunch meant to finalize wedding plans. That's where I stopped shrinking myself and let the truth speak for itself. I didn't lose weight to hurt them. I lost weight for me, and they couldn't handle what that revealed about themselves. The family dynamic was set before I could even walk. Bonnie arrived 18 months after me, and from that moment on, the roles were locked in. She was the miracle. I was the practice run they wished they could forget. They bragged about Bonnie to neighbors. They explained me away. When report cards came home, Bonnie's C- in algebra was totally fine because not everyone is academic. My A+ in advanced chemistry was met with polite silence like an inconvenience. When she failed her driving test 3 times, Dad paid for extra lessons without complaint. When I earned a full academic scholarship to State University, the celebration dinner somehow turned into a discussion about Bonnie's new boyfriend. I learned early that my success made people uncomfortable. The message was consistent and cruel. Bonnie's mediocrity needed protection. My competence needed containment. I learned to downplay achievements, soften language, and avoid sounding proud. Confidence was acceptable on her. On me, it was treated like arrogance. Bonnie was the princess. I was the embarrassment they managed. The body shaming started the moment puberty hit, and my body didn't develop like Bonnie's petite frame. Mom introduced portion control, but only on my plate. Dad would pat his stomach and glance at mine, saying, "We both need to watch it," even though Bonnie was halfway through her 3rd slice of cake. Family gatherings turned into performance reviews of my body. "Have you been exercising?" replaced, "Hello?" Relatives whispered about my weight problem like I wasn't standing right there. When I wore baggy clothes to hide, I was accused of not trying. When I dressed up, I was seeking attention. There was no version of my body that didn't offend them. Bonnie lived in a protective bubble where criticism couldn't reach her. When she dropped out of college after 1 semester, it was because school wasn't the right fit. When she couldn't keep a part-time job, it was because she had standards. When she maxed out credit cards, Dad quietly paid them off because she was still learning. Her basics were praised like achievements. Her failures were reframed as virtues. Meanwhile, I graduated summa cum laude, built a stable career, bought my own car, and managed my finances responsibly, while being treated like the family's ongoing disappointment. My success wasn't celebrated, it was managed so it wouldn't threaten Bonnie's fragile spotlight. Golden children never learn resilience, they learn entitlement. And scapegoats learn something else entirely: how to survive being told you're never enough, right up until the moment you become too much. Bonnie's engagement announcement came with a detailed timeline, a guest list of 200 people, and a very specific conversation about family presentation. The wedding was scheduled for 8 months out, which gave everyone plenty of time to prepare for what Mom kept calling the most important day of our family's life. The planning meetings started immediately. Venue tours, caterer tastings, florist consultations, all of which I was invited to attend but never asked to participate in. I was there to nod along, smile in the background, and step out of the frame when someone wanted a photo. 3 months into the planning, Mom pulled me aside after a particularly exhausting cake tasting session. Bonnie was laughing with the coordinator nearby, effortlessly center stage, while I stood off to the side holding purses and sample boxes. "We need to talk about the photos," Mom said, lowering her voice. "This wedding is going to be documented forever, and we want to make sure everyone looks their best." She didn't say asterisk, "You need to lose weight asterisk." She didn't have to. The message was wrapped in concern about presentation, family image, and making sure Bonnie's special day was perfect in every way. Mom said I needed to lose weight or I'd ruin the photos. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in emotional manipulation disguised as love. This wasn't about my body, it was about optics. "We just want you to feel beautiful up there with Bonnie," Mom said, glancing in her direction. "You know how photos can be unforgiving. We don't want you hiding in the back or feeling uncomfortable." Dad nodded along. "Think of it as a lifestyle change, something you'll thank us for later." They framed it as support, a gym membership, a personal trainer, an investment in me. What they never said out loud was the real condition. Asterisk, change your body or accept your place behind the scenes. Lose weight or don't expect to be fully included. They made it sound like encouragement. It felt like a warning. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to lose the weight, not because they'd asked, but because they'd finally shown me exactly who they were, and I wanted to see who I could become without carrying their limits. I researched trainers, nutrition plans, and workout schedules. I chose a gym 30 minutes away, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone who knew me as the fat sister. I bought new workout clothes, a food scale, and a notebook to track everything. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it deliberately. But I wasn't losing weight to meet their standards. I was losing it to find out what happened when I stopped accepting their version of who I was allowed to be. The transformation became an obsession, not with the scale, but with consistency. My trainer treated me like an athlete, not a problem. My nutritionist talked about fuel instead of punishment. For the first time, food wasn't moral, it was functional. The first month was brutal. My body resisted, my mind kept waiting for someone to tell me I was doing it wrong. But around week 6, something shifted. I stopped checking mirrors for flaws and started noticing performance. Heavier lifts, longer runs, better sleep, real strength. By month 3, I'd lost 25 pounds and dropped 2 dress sizes. By month 5, I was down 40. People at work noticed. Strangers asked questions. My body was changing, but more importantly, so was how I carried myself. Every pound I lost was distance from the role they'd written for me. At first, my family loved it. Mom bought me clothes, Dad bragged, Bonnie complimented me, though she suddenly mentioned how stressful wedding planning was and how she wished she had time to focus on herself too. Around month 4, the tone shifted. When I mentioned having to alter my bridesmaid dress, Bonnie laughed and said, "Well, don't get any smaller. You don't want to upstage the bride." Mom started asking if I was still eating enough. Dad joked that I was turning into one of those fitness people. By the time I'd lost 50 pounds, their praise had curdled into concern. They'd wanted me thinner. They just didn't expect me to become beautiful, or confident enough for it to show. The real shift happened at the final dress fitting 2 months before the wedding. I'd lost 60 pounds by then and needed the bridesmaid dress taken in significantly. When I stepped out of the dressing room, the seamstress actually gasped. "Oh my," she said, hands flying to her chest. "You look absolutely stunning." Bonnie was adjusting her wedding dress nearby, and I watched her face in the mirror. For the first time in our lives, I wasn't the one fading into the background. The seamstress kept circling me, pinning fabric, commenting on how dramatic the transformation was, how disciplined, how impressive. Bonnie didn't say a word. Her jaw tightened, her shoulders pulled back. She stared at my reflection like it had personally betrayed her. Mom laughed too loudly and changed the subject. Dad suddenly found his phone fascinating. No one congratulated me. That silence said more than any insult ever had. In that moment, we all understood the same thing. The wedding photos weren't going to tell the story Bonnie had imagined. The bride wasn't going to be the only one people remembered. For 24 years, Bonnie had been the pretty one by default. Now there was competition she hadn't prepared for. Bonnie realized she might not be the prettiest one anymore. From that day on, the family's behavior shifted into something I'd never experienced before, active sabotage disguised as concern. Mom started suggesting I take a break from the gym because I was getting too thin. Dad showed up at my apartment with takeout, insisting I needed to treat myself more often. Bonnie began making comments about how obsessed I'd become with working out, how I was probably not eating enough, how I should be more balanced. The same people who'd spent years criticizing my body were suddenly deeply invested in my well-being. They went from pushing me to lose weight to hoping I'd gain it back. The sabotage got more specific. Mom accidentally bought my old dress size when shopping for wedding events. Bonnie suggested hairstyles that hid my face and colors she knew washed me out. Dad joked, always in front of other people, about how real curves are more feminine. They weren't worried about my health. They were worried I couldn't be made small again. While going through old family documents for wedding planning logistics, I found something that explained everything. Hidden in a storage box were my college transcripts, scholarship letters, and academic awards, documents I'd assumed were lost years ago. My summa cum laude graduation, my dean's list recognitions, scholarship renewal letters, all buried. Meanwhile, Bonnie's mediocre report cards, C's and D's, had been displayed on the refrigerator for months when we were younger. Her dropping out of college after one semester had been reframed as finding herself. They hadn't just favored Bonnie, they'd erased me. Not my failures, my successes. They didn't want me thin. They wanted me invisible. The breaking point came at Bonnie's bridal shower 3 weeks before the wedding. I wore a simple black dress. Nothing flashy, nothing attention-seeking, but I looked good and people noticed. Several of Bonnie's friends complimented me throughout the afternoon, asking about my incredible transformation. I smiled politely. I said thank you. I didn't brag. After the party, Mom pulled me aside, her voice low and sharp. "This isn't about you," she hissed. "You're making Bonnie uncomfortable in her own spotlight. You need to tone it down." Tone it down. After losing 60 pounds because they demanded it. After shrinking myself my entire life to protect Bonnie's ego. After finally becoming visible on my own terms. That was the moment something in me settled permanently. They'd said enough for one lifetime. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I started collecting evidence. Not for a lawyer, not for a therapist, for myself. Because when you're gaslit long enough, you don't just doubt the story, you start doubting your own memory. I went through my phone and saved screenshots of everything. Mom's comments about my portion sizes at family dinners, Dad's jokes about my problem areas dropped casually into the family group chat. Bonnie's passive-aggressive observations about my clothes, my eating habits, my exercise routine, always framed as concern, never kindness. Every message had a timestamp. Every comment had a context. They weren't isolated incidents, they were a pattern. I found voicemails I'd saved without realizing why at the time. Dad telling me I needed to get serious about my health before it was too late. Mom explaining why I shouldn't be in certain family photos because the angles weren't flattering. Bonnie asking whether I'd considered professional help for my food issues. They thought I'd forget. I hadn't. While organizing everything, something shifted. This wasn't just emotional abuse, it was systematic, which meant I needed perspective outside the system. So I reached out to people who'd seen it happen in real time. Bonnie's friends, people who had no reason to lie for me. The replies came fast. Sarah remembered my mom commenting on my weight every single visit. Jessica recalled Bonnie encouraging friends to make remarks about how different we looked, always when I was within earshot. Emma remembered my parents praising Bonnie's C- grades while completely ignoring my academic awards. "I always thought it was strange," Sarah texted, "like you were the problem when you were obviously the capable one." These weren't bitter relatives or sympathetic friends. They were neutral observers, people who'd noticed the imbalance and felt uncomfortable long before I had words for it. Even Bonnie's friends had seen it. Then I opened the box of old documents. My transcript, 3.9 GPA, Dean's List every semester, graduation summa cum laude. Scholarship letters totaling over $60,000. Bonnie's transcript sat right next to mine. 2 semesters, failing grades, withdrawal. Dad's bank records showed him paying repeatedly for classes she never passed. Yet somehow in family lore, I was the one who struggled. They hadn't softened the truth. They'd flipped it completely. Employment records told the same story. My career showed steady advancement, raises, responsibility. Bonnie's resume was a rotation of part-time jobs, each ending with the same explanation. Bad management, toxic coworkers, unfair expectations. And then came the final realization. Dad's consulting career was actually unemployment disguised by titles. Mom's credit cards showed regular cosmetic procedures, while she criticized other women for caring too much about appearance. Bonnie had never succeeded independently at anything. I wasn't the failure in this family. I was the mirror. My weight was just the easiest thing to attack, the most visible target they could use to redirect attention away from their own disappointments. Seeing it all laid out, documented, and undeniable changed something fundamental. I stopped asking myself what was wrong with me and started asking a very different question. What was I still doing trying to earn approval from people who needed me small? Once I had the full picture documented, I started planning something I'd never done before, holding them accountable, not through tears or arguments or desperate attempts to make them understand. Through the one thing they'd never expected from me, strategic precision. I organized the evidence into categories: financial hypocrisy, academic lies, beauty standards they couldn't meet themselves, body shaming from people with their own insecurities. Each folder told a story that directly contradicted the version of reality they'd spent decades forcing me to live in. The strategy was simple: give them exactly the same energy they'd been giving me. Public judgment using the same language they'd used on me. The same casual cruelty, the same concerned observations, the same faux humor disguised as honesty. Only this time, everything would be accurate, documented, and impossible to dismiss as exaggeration or sensitivity. They'd spent years projecting their insecurities onto me because I was an easy target, because shrinking me made them feel taller. It was time to return that reflection, not to be cruel, but to be exact. While organizing my approach, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. This would be my last conversation with them, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something fundamental about toxic family dynamics. You can't fix people who need you broken. You can't earn love from people who require your failure to feel successful. You can't heal relationships built on your diminishment. I researched what therapists call no contact, complete separation from family members who cannot respect boundaries or tolerate success. The guilt hit immediately. These were my parents, my sister, the people who raised me. Wasn't cutting them off extreme? Then I looked at the evidence again. 24 years of systematic undermining. Academic achievements hidden to protect Bonnie's ego. My weight used as a weapon. My success treated like betrayal. I knew what this could cost me. Financial support could disappear overnight. Relatives would take sides without asking questions. I'd be labeled dramatic, unstable, or cruel for finally refusing to play my assigned role. There was a very real chance I'd lose my entire family in one afternoon. I was ready to lose them to save myself. When Mom called to invite me to what she described as a family lunch to finalize wedding details, I accepted immediately. She sounded relieved, probably expecting resistance after the bridal shower incident. "Wonderful," she said. "We can put all this wedding stress behind us and just be family again." We agreed to meet at their favorite restaurant, the same place where they'd celebrated Bonnie's engagement while barely acknowledging my promotion. I told them I'd bring some materials to help with planning. I didn't mention that those materials included printed copies of everything I'd collected: academic transcripts, screenshots of cruel messages, witness statements from Bonnie's friends, and financial records showing exactly who had succeeded and who hadn't. I prepared everything the night before, organizing it like a presentation. Not because I needed their approval anymore, but because I wanted them to see exactly what they'd been doing and what they were about to lose. I accepted their lunch invitation, knowing it would be the last conversation we ever had as a family. They thought this lunch was about wedding logistics. I knew it was about closure. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered it. White tablecloths, soft lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that made people lower their voices automatically. Perfect for what I had planned. Mom and Dad were already seated when I arrived. Bonnie was scrolling on her phone, clearly irritated about being pulled away from wedding preparations. "There she is," Mom said brightly, gesturing to the chair they'd left for me. "We ordered you the salmon. I know you're still being careful about what you eat. Still managing my body, still deciding for me." Dad stood and gave me a quick, polite hug. "You look great, sweetheart. Really great. We're so proud of how dedicated you've been." Bonnie glanced up just long enough to offer a thin smile. "Yeah, you look good," she said. "Just remember what I said about not upstaging the bride." They pretended everything was normal. Until I stopped playing along. I waited until the orders were placed, until the small talk dried up and Mom began talking about seating charts. Then I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table between us. Before we talk about wedding logistics, I said calmly, I want to share something I've been organizing. Family history, you could say. I opened the folder. The first section was screenshots, years of them. Messages about my portion sizes, jokes about my problem areas, suggestions that I needed professional help because of my body. I've been documenting our conversations, I continued evenly. Dad's jokes in the family group chat. Mom's comments about photos. Bonnie's observations about what I eat. The table went silent. Mom's fork froze halfway to her mouth. I also reached out to some of Bonnie's friends, I said, sliding printed emails across the table. Sarah, Jessica, Emma, they all remembered the same thing. The constant commentary, the humiliation, the favoritism. They found it uncomfortable to watch. Bonnie's face flushed. You had no right to involve my friends in this. Involve them? I smiled faintly. They were already involved. They were witnesses. Each page made them smaller. Then I turned to the next section. Since we're a family that values honesty, I said, echoing their favorite phrase, I thought I'd return the favor. I looked at Dad first. Your LinkedIn lists 3 years of consulting, which turns out to be unemployment between failed ventures. You've had 2 businesses collapse, yet somehow you spent decades lecturing me about discipline and success. Dad's jaw tightened. That's inappropriate. Is it? I asked. Because it's exactly how you spoke to me my entire life. I turned to Mom. Your credit card statements show monthly cosmetic procedures while you criticize women for being too focused on appearance. The projection is impressive. She opened her mouth to protest. I didn't let her. And Bonnie, I met my sister's eyes. 2 semesters of failing grades, dropped out, a string of part-time jobs lasting 3 to 6 months, and yet somehow I was the family embarrassment while you were protected as the success story. They tried to interrupt, to redirect, to question my mental state. I pointed back to the paperwork every time. Everything was dated, everything was factual, everything was real. This is what you've done to me for 24 years, I said quietly. The only difference is that my observations are backed by evidence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The table beside us had gone silent. I felt eyes flick toward us, then away. People sensing they were witnessing something they weren't meant to interrupt. Mom reached for her water glass with trembling hands. Dad stared at the tablecloth like it might give him answers. Bonnie's foot bounced under the table, her phone forgotten beside her plate. You're twisting things, Mom finally said, voice thin. We were just trying to help you. Help. That word landed heavier than any insult they'd ever used. I know, I replied. That's what makes this unforgivable. Dad opened his mouth, clearly searching for authority, for control. Nothing came out. There was no narrative left to manipulate. For the first time in my life, they weren't defining the story. I stood, placed the folder back into my bag, and set cash on the table for my untouched meal. I'm done, I said calmly. Done shrinking myself, done protecting your egos, done pretending this is love. I looked at Bonnie. I hope your wedding is everything you want. I turned to my parents. And I hope you learn to live with yourselves without needing to break someone else. I paused. Don't contact me. Don't show up. Don't send relatives. This isn't anger. This is boundaries. Then I walked away. From the table, the restaurant, and a family that never deserved me. The aftermath was exactly what I'd expected. Panic, denial, and desperate attempts to rewrite what had just happened. My phone started buzzing before I even got home from the restaurant. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages, voicemails that ranged from Dad's confused anger to Mom's tearful manipulation to Bonnie's outraged demands that I fix this before the wedding. They tried every angle they could think of. I was having a breakdown. I was jealous of Bonnie's happiness. I was making a huge mistake that I'd regret for the rest of my life. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions about my mental state and my responsibility to family. People who'd spent decades telling me I wasn't good enough were now desperately trying to convince me I needed them. That desperation was the proof I'd never had before. What they never understood was that I didn't cut them off out of anger. I cut them off out of clarity. I didn't reply, I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I didn't listen to the last voicemails or read the follow-up messages. I let silence do the work they'd spent 24 years avoiding. From what I heard later through distant relatives, the wedding went on, but without the perfect family image they'd spent years curating. Questions were asked, absences were noticed. The dynamic felt off. For the first time, they had no scapegoat to point at, no daughter to shrink so everyone else could feel taller. The golden child lost her mirror, the parents lost their scapegoat. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like the one they'd predicted I'd regret. I earned a promotion that came with a corner office and a 20% salary increase. I started dating someone who found my ambition attractive instead of threatening. I trained for and completed my first half marathon. I bought a house in a neighborhood I'd admired for years but never thought I deserved. Without the constant criticism, without managing other people's insecurities, without carrying the emotional weight they'd assigned me, I flourished. Losing them was the best weight I ever lost. The transformation that started because they wanted better wedding photos turned out to be about something much bigger than dress sizes or approval. It was about discovering what happens when you stop accepting other people's limitations as your own. Sometimes the most important weight you lose isn't physical. Sometimes it's the emotional baggage you've been carrying for people who convinced you it was love. And sometimes the best transformation isn't who you become, it's who you finally stop carrying with you.